I did, that's what I really want to hear. All right, we are moving through power and we are going to talk about commitment. And I thought I'd bring up one of my favorite shows. In the 20s, believe it or not, 100 years ago, there was a writer by the name of Earl Stanley Gardner, and he wrote a series of what are called whodunits. And they were excellent mystery novels, but their central character was a person by the name of Perry Mason. So Perry Mason was a consummate, good lawyer. He did everything for his client, and he did so by solving the murders. Now, one of the great things about Perry Mason as a show was he had a great protagonist, and it was this gentleman by the name of Hamilton Berger, who was played by William Talman. William Talman was a brilliant actor. He died tragically in the 60s from smoking, from lung cancer. He did a commercial on the dangers of lung cancer that made my mother stop forever. So in this way, he's something of a hero to me. But he was the guy that got Perry's goat. And it's interesting to watch them go back and forth with each other. An interesting play to play, just to show you this on them together in a normal courtroom setting. Let me unmute this first.
Honor, I object. Counsel for defense is up to his usual grandstand. Objection. Your Honor, once again, Mr. Mason is demonstrating his characteristic courtroom pirate techniques.
Your Honor, it's perfectly obvious that Mr. Mason's been up to one of his usual tricks.
Oh, Your Honor, I object. That's incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. It's also improper cross-examination. I object, Your Honor. This is improper cross-examination. It's incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial, in that it assumes a fact not in evidence.
Objected to is argumentative, assuming a fact not in evidence, leading and suggestive, and utterly incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. Sustained.
So they were at loggerheads and everyone, and it was really, they were great, I would say great opponents in a very competitive sense. And yet in one episode in season 5, it lasted 9 years, by the way. In season 5, Hamilton Berger had a friend who was accused of murder. He could not actually prosecute the case. It had to go to another assistant district attorney. But who did he turn to defend his friend other than Perry Mason? And so, of course, Perry figured out who the real murderer is. His friend was freed. And so this is kind of the end of the episode.
You know, I think I won this case.
Can you imagine those two guys who were fighting back and forth at each other? Now they're sharing a cup of coffee together. And that's the basic way it was. They knew each other in the plot by first name. Perry called him Hamilton. Hamilton Berger called him Perry. And yet, in the middle of this, they were willing to go to war with each other. And I think it actually speaks to the American justice system, or the ideal, in that this is the way we feel that we can do our best to make sure that we ensure justice. We have the prosecution on one side and the defense on the other, and the prosecution must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't mean beyond a shadow of a doubt, because quite simply, you can always throw in Martians, all right? So, the important thing to realize is, and to put this into perspective when we talk about conflict, is that here we have two conflicting individuals, but pursuing one goal, and it's justice. And so that's what I want you to consider when we talk about conflict, and try to put that in its framework, okay? Yes, I was about to do that. This still ain't.
In there, what's her name again? Stella Danielson? I think it's Brandon. What?
Not sure.
Brandon Berg, I had her for a while.
Harder and some louder than me. Anyway. So
She's funny.
with all of this in together, what is conflict and how do we define it? And how do we look at it as anything other than bad? I mean, usually we think of something as it's something to avoid. We think of it with contentiousness and disunity. But it's important for us to consider conflict in a neutral light, just as we consider power. And so conflict is a state of opposition or discord among organizations in a marketing channel. It comes from the Latin word confligere, which means to collide, all right? It usually happens when one member is pursuing a particular pathway that makes another partner look at that individual as an adversary or even an opponent. And so if we use this definition and we talk about it as channel conflict, it is the certain behavior by a channel member that is in opposition to the wishes or behavior of its channel counterpart. It is not competition when one group wishes to attain a different goal than the other, but it is a conflict. Conflict, what we have to also understand is many different stages, and many times it can actually be a good thing. And so we're going to talk about conflict in a good light, and we're also going to talk about conflict in a bad light. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the stages of conflict. Conflict's movement from something that is not even understood, but something that is manifestly bad. And so this next slide is a good one, but I don't like this circle thing because they get it completely wrong. The least is latent, the greatest is manifest, and actually the way to look at it is a reverse Z. It goes like this: latent, perceived, to felt, to manifest. And so the first one is a latent conflict. This is when the members do not perceive the conflict existing, yet it probably exists. Usually it happens when members are just trying to pursue their normal goals, trying to attain their own autonomy, such as doing things like going to find separate suppliers for goods. That would be an example. In the competition for limited resources, one group may win over another, but conflict isn't necessarily recognized. Latent conflict is probably the norm in most marketing channels, and it's inevitable that there is some collisions when two different organizations try to go about achieving their goals. If they ignored each other, probably disappear. The next level up is the perceived conflict. And this is when a channel member senses opposition. Either opposition to their point of view, their perception of reality, or the intentions in which they are trying to work under. Perceived conflict is good because it is cognitive, it is emotionless. It is even considered just in a day's work. You know, you're rubbing sharp elbows against each other, and these are the kinds of things that happen. We had a discord or a disagreement. We have, come on in. We missed you. We had a discord or a contention or a conflict. They wanted us in the legal department for the summit. They wanted the people who were doing things pro bono, in other words, on their own nickel, to sign contracts. They were doing these things for free. Why? Well, unfortunately, legal has their point of view of the way things, and we have our point of view. You don't muscle your friends around, especially when they're doing this out of the goodness of your heart. We have two speakers that are traveling 3 hours from here. I've got two other speakers that are coming from East Tennessee that are doing this just out of the goodness of their heart. And I have a totally different opinion of the others. And the one thing that you have to look at is when you're in a position like this, realize is that this may not be the point of view of the person who's having to deliver this stuff. I mean, they may not agree with it either, but that's basically their job. And sometimes it's the best way to handle these things. So one of the things is it's not in my job description, so I didn't worry about it, but it happened above me. And the final thing was, well, forget it. All right, we'll just not have contracts. And we said, thank you. All right. Because seriously, if you take it reductio ad absurdum, anytime that somebody comes in and speaks, you're supposed to sign a contract. I don't know. Silly in its base. This was a perceived conflict, a little bit of sharp elbow rubbing. Am I emotional about it? In one way, a little bit frustrating, but it never went in what I would consider to be real felt or affective conflict. I did not have any long-term negative emotions towards the individuals who are having to do this. And this is what affective conflict is. It's when your emotions start to get into play and you have anxiety and anger and frustration and hostility and just about everything else you can have when watching a horror movie. Okay. It's beyond just, your own personal considerations. You're just into it too deep. All right. Finally, the last stop, and we'll talk a little bit more about manifest conflict, because all of this can be what we call functional conflict. In other words, it could actually be a good thing, but manifest conflict is the absolute worst. In manifest, one group tries to sabotage each other. Manifest conflict is shown openly in behaviors which even undercut the other corporation's ability to make money, even to the hurting of your own corporation. You engage in maybe even irrational behaviors. Not only that, but it also becomes part of what's known as organizational memory. So let me kind of back up there on felt conflict, just to let you know. Felt conflict, one of the things that happens also is that you start to anthropomorphize the corporations themselves. You start talking to them as if the corporation was an individual. Look at that company out there. Look what they keep doing. Isn't this ridiculous? Why do we have to do this way? And in one way, you're both humanizing and dehumanizing the corporation. You're giving them a face of an enemy. All right. Well, manifest conflict is the same way, but it's even worse because it becomes part of the organizational id. It becomes part of the memory of the organization itself, and it's passed from member to member as things go along. And so that as you become part of the organization, you immediately become an enemy of someone else. And that's one of the things that manifest behavior or manifest conflict brings. Okay. And so these are the 4 stages: from latent to perceive, where you understand and it's emotionless, to felt, to manifest, let's just say this, in my conflict, I feel no emotion afterwards, and usually a felt conflict or an affective one, you have a bad taste in your mouth, and I don't. It just was there and it's gone, all right? So conflict, though, there's ways of measuring it to determine whether or not you're really in conflict, all right? Conflict, like everything, is a process. And so you've got to be able to break down, where does the conflict come from? What are the measuring sticks or the dimensions of what conflict is? And so just as we had a formula for power, we're going to have a formula for measuring conflict, okay? So conflict equals the importance of an item multiplied by its frequency multiplied by its intensity, all right? So let's kind of break these one at a time, just like we do in the other. And let's kind of think of these on a 10 to 0 scale, okay? In that way, we can kind of get a measuring or objective way of trying to measure just exactly how conflict ridden we are, okay? So we draw our little scales here, we come up with these ideas, and we look at them one at a time. So, is the importance high? Or are the problems coming up what we would call petty? Or just small, even to the point of not significant? That would be the first way that we could determine whether or not it was bad or dangerous. The next is how frequent. We can go very frequent to very infrequent. My youngest daughter is like a cat. As soon as I sit down and start to work, she comes and sits in my lap. And how do you tell your daughter to get away? Don't have it. So I go off, I got 2 more minutes of work, she comes and sits in my lap again. Thank you, honey, I love you. 5 minutes later, she goes, 2 minutes later, she comes back. Yes, honey. Yes, I get it. Yes, yes, honey. And pretty soon it's 8:30 and they've got to go to bed. All right. And I've done 10 minutes of work. So anyway, but there's no conflict. All right. So anyway, that's an idea of what frequency can do to you. And then the last is intensity. And this is how substantially strong is this disagreement? All right. Is it strong? Or is it low or weak? Okay. This is a great little way to measure in your own mind just how much conflict ridden you are. So I'll give you an own measuring stick of what everything that's been going on in this summit that has just been driving me crazy. Most of the things that we're going through are of importance, but they are just simply things that I have to take care of. All right. So generally, their importance is here and that they need to be taken care of, but we just handle it. I've got the answers, no problems, no real major things, no roadblocks that are creating conflict. So it's not bad, okay? Is the intensity strong? No, actually the intensity is kind of low. So it's not that bad. I mean, I'm not, you know, because I've already got the structure in my head. I've already got how the day is going to line up. All we have to do to get together is figure these things out. It'll be good. But I'm getting 20 emails an hour now, okay? And so the frequency is driving me insane, all right? And so this is where I am in terms of the conflict meter, all right? It won't go away until April 29th comes along, all right? And so this is a good way. Now, when you look at it this way, and if you use this as a measuring stick, it kind of helps you to at least understand where things come from. And understanding is the first roadmap to be able to reduce tension in you. You know, your own competence will be able to handle these things. And it does really encapsulate your own personal levels of frustrations. So it's there, it's livable, and I deal with it. But if you do this, it's kind of a good way of measuring where you are in your day-to-day interactions, okay? And so that's how we measure conflict. Okay, before I go on, I wanted to show you an article that this is in or on your, this article is on your, As You Learn. You don't have to, I'll tell you what, you'll have to know who the authors are. I'll do bonus points. I'll do like a separate online, 3 bonus points, 1 line you just fill in. And one of the questions is, who wrote this commitment trust theory? And it was Morgan and Hunt. Shelby Hunt, by the way, is one of the great marketing gurus of all time. He passed away only a few months ago. The marketing theory book that I got my PhD from, he wrote. He's been writing books for 50 years and is considered the quintessential man on theory and marketing, okay? But this article is very fascinating. I urge you, if you would be really serious about this stuff, to read it, because he talks about some things that might be considered common sense, but he finds ways of validating our assumptions, which is really what research is all about. You know, research is observation, hypotheses, controlled experiments, and examination of the results. And they went through this, and these are some of the things that they confirmed. These are what are called constructs, by the way. These are questions that they would be asking that define what trust means or what communication means and relationship benefits and shared values. And these constructs are unique and separate. And what they find is that there are positive relations between communicating with someone and trust. And there's a negative relationship in opportunistic behavior. In other words, acting to your own advantage when someone is vulnerable. And the more opportunistic you are, the less trust you generate. And that's what that means. Now, if you notice here, we're going to come up with an item called functional conflict, and I'm going to talk about it. And I kind of want to tell you, this stuff doesn't just evolve out of textbooks, that we just kind of think these things up. These things come from research that we do. And I want you to know about this one and this one and commitment in a different way. You don't have to know them for tests, but this is really good valued research. And I want to show you how it dovetails with the next item. So the consequences of conflict are not necessarily bad. And that is the point I have to make. Conflict can bring good. If conflict, as you saw in that Morgan Hunt theory, is that it works towards change where change needs to be done. And so let's look on the good side of conflict. It can actually improve performance. If members recognize each other's contributions, they understand that success does not happen without each other. If you establish a way of communicating grievances against each other, if you critically review your past actions and are willing to turn an untainted light towards desiring change, then conflict can be good. It can stir up the dirt that hasn't been stirred up in years. It can make others see things in a new light. And you can oppose each other without damaging in a relationship. As long as channel members are connected to each other, conflict can be elevated and tolerated to something good. But the performance requires cooperation and communication, the belief that together we're stronger versus being separate. It can't be that one side wins all, except, let me also say this, in my conflict resolution strategies in my relationship, I believe in winner take all, because quite simply compromises in some things are not simply good because nobody gets everything that they wish. I give in completely, all right? If my wife argues, and she's a brilliant arguer, I mean, she's got a PhD, so I mean, it says something. If she comes up with logical reasons, I give in completely. You know, and it makes sense, except if it's something I want, all right? And then I'm all in with both feet, all right? And usually that involves my children, okay? And I don't compromise when it comes to my kids, all right? And I think we come out pretty well. I mean, we're pretty strong-headed A-type personalities, but I think we find ways of living together and functioning as a single unit, and it works out. But I think it has to do that we elevate things, we respect each other, and we're willing to communicate between each other. And that's what I think brings it to a logical, good conclusion, all right? Now, the difficulty also can be is that indifference can be just as bad, but not necessarily totally seen. So we can be indifferent on something, and indifference is not necessarily good, all right? Indifference just might mean you have a low opinion of what's going on. But if I'm indifferent, do I have no opinion whatsoever? That's a good question, all right? I will say my differences or my oppositions, but once again, I give wholeheartedly, and I am a total supporter after that, okay? That's, like I said, it works for me. Everybody has their own. I hope yours is better than mine. Okay. Oh, one other thing I wanted to say about that is that it also is difficult when you look at your partners as being lessers. It doesn't work, okay? So this is the good side. Manifest conflict is the bad side, the dark side of the force. High friction creates high cost. Firms start feeling that better alternatives are out there. They reduce your overall satisfaction. And as I said, they become part of organizational memory. The apperceptive mass, the total functional knowledge of a corporation passes from each member to the other. And just by joining an organization, you become the enemy of another. The corporate id takes over when you're trying to arrange things. And as I said, even to the point of damaging yourself. Good relationships are what are known as disputatious. Disputatious are willing to give and take. Unsatisfactory social relationships reduce trust. And the definition of trust is the belief that another party will act in fairness or in your best overall benefit. And the difficulty with manifest conflict is we tend to minimize it when sometimes it needs to be managed. Manifest conflict is very costly. Sometimes it just goes to war. I've always wanted to be those people who believe, Robert Heinlein once wrote, always give your enemy a chance to be your friend. So like, I used to play basketball in church league. Boy, is that rough. The Methodists and the Catholics, and I was Catholic. Anyway, the Methodists had this player named Ronald Simmons, and Ronald was a great shooter and a good player, just bad temper. I just didn't like him, and didn't even like him more because I couldn't beat him, you know. So anyway, we were playing church ball, and it was during Christmas break, and we were doing round robin. And Ronald comes up to me and goes, "Hey, Shows." Back then it was called Shows. "Hey, Shows, They kicked me off of Bunker Hill. Can I come play on your team? And I went, yeah, Ronald, sure. Why not? We won 2 championships with Ronald. Division I and Division II, #1 team in the whole thing. So sometimes, folks, give your enemies a chance to be your friends. Always leave an opening over. You never know. I used to have a teacher, Sister Marilyn, who was tough and young and gruff, and she taught chemistry, and nobody laughed with her. And we did, we just kind of got, and before you knew it, she was our friend, even though she would never give us a break on the test. What could I expect? All right. Anyway, what are the sources of conflict? Where does conflict come from? Well, the conflict comes from 3 major ways in which we interact with our partners. And we're going to talk about them one at a time. And these are the 3, but before I go on, I just wanted to show them to you, and let's talk about the first one, competing goals. So if any of you go into industrial and organizational psychology, which is a great field, by the way, if you ever want to get a master's in negotiation, industrial organizational psychology and leadership and ethics, and you can punch your own ticket, all right? One of the things that helps us understand the natural conflict between individuals is what's known as the agency theory. All right. And so the agency theory plays itself like this. You have 2 individuals in the relationship, and one is called the principal. And you have another one that's called the agent. And under under agency theory, agency series basically states the principal gives the agent a work to be delegated, or delegates work to the agent. The principal is the work creator. And so the goal of the principal is to ensure that the agent performs the goal or the work. The agent, their job is to perform the work. Okay, so it's like this, all right? And so for the principal, in order to get the work done, doesn't directly work on the work, they work on the agent, all right? So think of it that way. You're being pursued into a goal, and the principal isn't doing the work, you are, all right? And so you are the respondent, or you're the individual who's getting it from the principal. But the agent may have other reasons that they're around. They may think, well, I don't like the way this is being done. I think I can do it in a better way. When the principal said, that's not what I'm asking for, I'm wanting you to do the work. And so this is the concept of competing goals, okay? And not necessarily conflicting or clashing goals, all right? The goals aren't like this, okay? The goals are like this, they're skewed, okay? They don't touch each other. And the tension that the agent will feel sometimes comes not in that their goals are clashing, but that their goals are going in different directions. And that's what goal divergence means. So Dr. Alvinson will get frustrated sometimes because some of the people that she's working for when she does papers, and her track record on her journal articles is amazing. You have no idea. But in order to get that particular part done, she has to work with the agent versus doing the work herself, or she'll get frustrated, she'll do the work on her own, okay? Which is my job every day, is to try to find a way to get her to stop acting on me and let her do the work, okay? Doesn't work. Anyway, that's what makes a happy marriage. Anyway, so goal divergence is this, all right? It is the skewing of different reasons that you're in business. And the only way to find a way to get this to work is through communication and an understanding of what the actors are doing, and appreciate that. This is why it's very good for you if you take some kind of managerial psychology class, because it may not let you completely buy in, but at least you'll have some appreciation or understanding. And sometimes that's what it takes to get through with the day. So competing goals, all right? Well, those competing goals also feed into different perceptions of reality. The perceptions of reality for the manufacturer are different for the retailer and the end user. And so the manufacturer wants sales. He wants to sell as many items out of his production that he possibly can. Because if they get as many of those items out, it means that the factors of production can work even more and the price per unit drops lower. Whereas the retailer, their concern is profit. They need to make as much as they can off of every individual item that they sell. It means also that because I'm focusing on sales if I am in production and I am focusing on profits as a retailer, it means that either side is looking at totally different things in order for what them to consider success. So if I sold my entire manufacturing plant's production in the last 6 months, I'm feeling great. If I'm a retailer and I was forced to cut those, the sale of those items down to nothing, I'm not happy. Now, we think it's bad. We're in domestic markets. We have a kind of a mutual understanding or way of learning, but international markets are even greater. And so as I've talked about Asian cultures have difficulties in saying the word no or responding in a negative way. It's very possible for us to think that we have an agreement, but quite simply, we have a different perception of what that means. It's just a cultural base.
I'm curious about that. So when they say like yes, but then like down the road, you get like an email or call saying no, not really gonna work out.
They would probably say, well, it's possible if we can do that, but they'll never give a firm answer. They'll never say no.
Indirect no.
Right, and that's exactly what it'll be. I mean, to do that to I wouldn't say friend, but a partner would be considering doing something to make that partner lose face. If you look at the World War II history has fascinated me as well. Many of the major issues that were going on in the Japanese fleet during World War II were not solved quite simply because if they were to point out the problems, then they would cause embarrassment to their superior officers. Even worse, it may get them shipped off to literally Mongolia if they were to point out errors, okay? And that was one of the difficult. United States during World War II had no problem removing generals that were ineffective. The Kimball, the admiral in Hawaii, was removed immediately after Pearl Harbor and replaced with Nimitz because the United States had, like I said, has no problem finding failure and getting rid of it. But in cultures where, oh gosh, what is the word I want to say? Where
Like honor.
yeah, and even more than that, but the putting of someone up on a pedestal, all right, the removal of that person would be considered dishonorable. It means that you prop up a lot of people that are incompetent, okay?
The Japanese emperor, he was like a god.
Well, he was the literal God. Before you say that, yes.
Mhm.
As far as the people was concerned, he was God on earth. There's no doubt about that. And the final solution that we had in terms of coming up is that he was willing to stay in power as a deity, or excuse me, he told his people to no longer think of him as such. And that's what changed modern to Japan to what it is now. It's a fascinating story. The last is intra-channel competition, the fight that goes on between the channel members. The suppliers upstream will get really upset if your downstream partners represent competitors. And so if you're in a brand name franchise and you sell Yokohama tires, you sell Pirellis, Dunlops, Goodyear, Firestone, all of those, then there may be a certain amount of rough elbows rubbing up against each other because you don't like the fact that somebody is out there. Once again, sales is their number one. They want to sell you a large assortment to be able to exploit those economies of scale because they can pool the demand together. And that's another thing, is they want to sell as many as they can. The downstream partners can sense this, especially if the manufacturers rely on several competitors in the particular market, especially a market like this in Boone, where you are more or less captured to what you have here unless you travel down the mountain to either Hickory or towards Wilkesboro. It kind of, you're kind of forced to come up with this. And so these are the two perspectives between the two of them. And they start a natural clash. The last is the difficulties with multiple channels. If you use more than one route to get to the same market, and that's important, the same segment, then there is a more heightened competition between them. Not only that, but just in this given area, even a little Boone, you have multiple ways that you can get goods to the market. You can do it online direct. You can go into retailer. You can go buy online, pick up in store. You can do mail order. You have as many different ways that you want. And each one of those is a multiple channel down to the consumer. And customers say, great, because with more competition, with more outlets to the same item, the consumer is always looking for a bargain. And so the truth be told, if you look at them, the suppliers and the customers like more channels. The ultimate manufacturer wants as many outlets as possible. The end user wants as many as he can find. And so the retailer is usually left out in the middle. Well, they may feel angry. They may want to retaliate. They may reduce their commitment any way they can. They just simply don't want to help them anymore. Now, there's really only one market where multiple channels are generally without conflict, or the few ways. One of them is in a rising market where you're selling everything that you possibly can, and that's kind of rare. The other is when consumers perceive that whatever product category is differentiated. And so a Samsung tablet is profoundly different from an iPad, which is profoundly different from a Microsoft Surface Pro. They're all different, unique, differentiated, and there's relatively little competition between them. And then finally, if a marketer has a consistent buying pattern that don't deviate, then that's not considered bad either. And so you've really got only three outlets where the possibility for conflict doesn't exist. Now, it doesn't mean that they necessarily compete. And the other thing to realize is, once again, is that different outlets should respond to different consumer segments. So way back in the in the 30s, Pepsi started coming out with vending machines. They originally came out with a 6.5 ounce bottle, but RC, manufactured in North Carolina, came out with the 12 ounce bottle, and Coke was forced to abdicate and go to the 12 ounce bottle. So the original 6.5 ounce bottles were perfect for mixing bourbon and Coke. Just to let you know, that's kind of their measuring stick. Okay. I remember my Uncle Jules used to have cases of them. Anyway. So the 12 ounce bottle became the accepted vending size as well. And they started putting vending machines outside of supermarkets, and the supermarkets went ape because they were saying people that are going, why would they come in the store to buy Coke if they can buy it at the vending machine? And Coke Coke said, well, we got the power to do anything we want, stop us. All right, they said that first. But the next thing is that they try to convince them that the individuals who would stop at the vending machines were different than the individuals who would go in the store and buy a 6-pack, and they were right. Because the vending machine people only wanted one, and the people who went into the supermarkets wanted 6 or more. And it worked out great, and it did. My brother will go 10 miles out of his way to Walmart to get a Coke for 50 cents instead of stopping at the store next to his house for 75 cents. Figure it out. Anyway, just remember this is that channels can help each other. And that there is combinations that can actually work if you don't look at these things in a generally conflicting manner. Not always, but it can. And so one last thing before we move to gray markets is, how do we differentiate product? Is we come up with a multiple channel strategy in which we put flagship product line in one stores and secondary or periphery products in another. And so the top of the line MacBook Pros are sold by the universities and the Apple stores. And at Walmart, you get the iPads and the iPhones and all the other accessories. And that's kind of a way of cooling the heels of everyone so that you do create some kind of uniqueness because you make the products located in a different outlet. Okay. All right. So before we go on, let's see. So, the Pez Outlaw. If you have not seen this, if any of you have Netflix, it's a documentary and it's pretty cool. That's all I can say, okay? So, what is the story about Pez Outlaw? So, there may be no more collectible group in the world than people who collect Pez dispensers. They are as manic as anyone else, all right? So Pez distribution comes through one company in the United States called Pez USA. The guy who's the president has a cute name. He calls himself the president. Anyway, but the thing about it is that Pez is actually made in Europe and especially in Eastern Europe. And so Pez USA controls the distribution of what Pez dispensers are distributed in the United States. And so this guy, Steve Glue, who nicknamed himself Pez Outlaw, all right, he decided he was going to go to Eastern Europe and buy Pez right from the manufacturers and ship them into the United States. So this goes on. It's a great story. It's worth watching. It's fun. So it comes to that guy that buys these thousands of Pez dispensers. He gets the customs in the United States, And there's like, you can't bring this in here, you know, you're having trademark violations, you can't do this. And while they were going through this conversation, one of the customs agents looked up. Pez USA had never filed trademark protection in the United States. There is nothing, or there was nothing illegal about Steve Glue buying goods in Europe and bringing them to the United States. And so the customs agent in New York said, come right on in, okay? And so this is the story of how this it is. It's kind of a really wonky story. It's very interesting. But it's one of those interesting, eclectic kind of individuals who made a difference in a strange way. And I just use this to dovetail into my final discussion, and that is on the concept of gray markets. So a gray market is the sale of authorized branded products through unauthorized distribution channels. When I was at Omni Computer Store in Lafayette in the 80s, when I was a store manager there, we had a elementary school called Fatima that really liked the owners of where I worked, and they wanted to buy Commodores from us, Commodore 64s. And we were not an authorized Commodore dealer, but they wanted to buy from us because they liked us. So we had a distributor in Houston that would sell us Commodores in groups of 10, and we would get like a 20% break. And Benny, that was the name of the owner, just marked it up 10% just to cover stuff and just sold them to them. And that's the way it worked, and it worked well. All right. And so that is an example. It's an authorized product. It's not a knockoff or a counterfeit, but it's going through an unauthorized distribution channel. Now, there are authorized distributors who do that. And then you also have what are called arbitrageurs. All right. Arbitrageurs are individuals who buy huge amounts in one market at a substantial discount and transport them to another market where there's high prices or where there's an internal embargo in one way or another. So let's see. In China, the iPhones that are sold there are not necessarily available to the people who actually build them. So I'm just doing a very bad drawing. However, there's this little island off the coast of China called Taiwan, and the arbitrageurs that are there, the professional traders, will do this. They'll buy mass quantities of iPhones in Hong Kong, ship them to China, to Taiwan, and then turn right back around and ship them back to China. Because the importing is different than the exporting. And so this is what a gray market does. Generally, it follows the rule is that they ship it from scarcity, or excuse me, from plenty to scarcity, and that's how they get their money. The ultimate source that there's a victim is the supplier, but the truth is, who's the victim? I mean, you might want to say that the victim could be the retailers, maybe. Are the victims the people who get the goods? Not necessarily, because the individuals in Japan, especially with Louis Vuitton and Chanel, the prices are simply not affordable. And so what you find is that there are people who buy Louis Vuitton in Europe and ship it to Japan and make substantial profits off of substantial different discounts that they have in Japanese store. And the fact is that the opening of the liberalization of world trade has brought us to this. But why do they persist? Why? It's a major cause of conflict, both upstream and downstream. Downstream members think it's unfair But there's a couple of reasons why, and mostly it's thought of as almost a victimless crime. I mean, if I'm a manufacturer, I don't care. Remember, for manufacturers, all I care about is sales. For the consumer, all I want is them. Now, certainly the retailers, they have a reason, okay? But then again, as a retailer, and we were a retailer, we were involved in the gray market as well. And so the truth is somewhere in the middle, it's very difficult to come up with a good person and a bad person in this. And that's why I call it kind of a victimless crime. I mean, the product tends to be mature. I mean, you don't see these things in others. The violators are difficult to detect. It usually requires some digging. Anybody who's tried to buy concert tickets, or the last time I went to go see Arsenal play PSG, that's like 3 years ago, I had to go search because I had no idea, because the tickets were coming up $380. And I was thinking to myself, that's outrageous. And I was right. After I spent about 4.5 hours online, I found the actual tickets were $65. Okay. And that basically what you had is you had individuals who were buying blocks of tickets. And I didn't want to be scammed, and I wasn't. Okay. Most decide just to look the other way. We just decide it's not worth our effort. They're selling, and that's what the manufacturers care about. And ultimately, we find some way of getting along. Okay. All right, we are finished with this chapter. We're going to talk about like power. We'll talk about how to use power. We'll talk about how to negate conflict. See you Monday and have a great weekend.